Well, it's great to see everybody. Thanks for singing along with us this morning, and just welcome to you if you're here in the room hanging out with us, or you are sitting at home watching online, or you're listening or watching later. It's awesome that you've chosen to spend part of your week worshiping along with us. We know you could be doing 100 different things right now, wherever you're at, and we're just grateful that you decided to dig in with us. My name is Corey, and I have the honor and privilege of being the lead pastor here at GFC, which is one of my favorite things in the world. And we've been going through a series called Mark, going through the Gospel of Mark, and this is the book of the Bible that we will spend the most time in over the course of this year for our church. And so, as I've said over the course of the last few weeks, we're not going to go through all of Mark in one shot. We're going to break it up a little bit. In fact, next week, Pastor Andrew will put a cap on this section of Mark, and then we will transition into a different series right before you think about what's coming next, Easter, right? Which is almost here, which is bonkers to me. And so just thinking about that, so you guys know, we're going to have some things pushed out about that so you know what the plan is, but obviously we'll be here Easter Sunday. We will also have a Good Friday communion service that will happen that week, and so we'll get some more information out to you. But as you're thinking about your calendar for Easter weekend, just think about that, and we're excited to spend Easter with you. But we've been walking through the book of Mark, and we've been creating some resources as well for you. So just in case you didn't know, or just as a reminder, you can connect with us on the Bible app. We're producing devotionals every week that are connected to the passage that we're looking at on Sunday. So if you want to dig in a little bit deeper, you can do that as well. There's a bunch of us connected there, which is fantastic. And so if you'd like to do that, that opportunity is there for you as well. It's been great to kind of dig in, and I want to kind of remind us of something that I said a couple weeks ago, because today can be kind of that way with the passage we're going to look at. Mark does a really good job of giving us an account of what Jesus is doing, what his ministry looks like, and we're still early in the ministry. We're going to be in the second half of chapter 2 today, but one of the things that Mark tends to do is he tends to kind of go from like situation to situation, and he doesn't always necessarily create a good segue there. It's kind of like he just kind of gives us little snippets, and he goes from this to this to this, okay? And so today we're going to do that a little bit. So we're going to look at some different situations, and they're kind of flowing along, but they're a little bit different. And so one of the things I've encouraged people with, as we've seen this kind of happen in Mark, is think about, and we talked about this last week, right? Like, ask Jesus. You can even like pray this in your heart now. Like, think about, Jesus, what do I need from this? Sometimes we come to passages like this, and I want to make sure we feel okay about it. It's hard to grab all of it. It's hard to be like, I'm going to learn this and this and this and that. And you know this. Sometimes when you try and grasp too many things at once, none of it sticks well, right? And so we try and grab one of these things. Grab onto one or two things today. I'm going to try and do a good job of kind of digging in and helping us understand what's going on and think through and process, ask the Holy Spirit, what is it that I need from this? What are the things that I'm supposed to grab onto? And try and grab onto one thing and then walk away with that, put that into practice, and see what Jesus would have you do with that in the days to come, all right? So before we dive in, like I said, we're going to be in Mark 2, but I want to remind us just briefly to follow along. So if you want to follow along on our website, you're welcome to do that. All the verses, all the notes are there. They'll be up on the screen for you as well, but you can get to that online. And even if you're watching later this week, or you think about it later this week, they usually last until about Friday, so you can grab those notes as well. All right, so Mark chapter 2, we're going to start in verses 13 to 14. This is what it says, Mark 2, 13 to 14. It says, Then Jesus went out to the lake shore again and taught the crowds that were coming to him. Now, I'm going to hit this nail on the head. I've done it before. I'll do it again. Jesus continues to do this. He's got these people coming to him. What does he do immediately? He starts teaching. This is, again, to help us understand, the word of God is so important. They're coming for certain things. They're coming to see things. They want to connect with Jesus. But what's Jesus first go to? I'm going to teach them. I'm going to teach him the Old Testament. He's going to teach him why he came. He's going to teach him the new information about the new covenant that he's bringing. He just begins to teach. So we should recognize that and say we need to get back to the Word of God on a regular basis. It says this, as he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at his tax collector's booth. Follow me and be my disciple, Jesus said to him. So Levi got up and followed him. Now, here's what happens with Mark, okay? Mark gives us like 2 verses, and he goes, here's what happened. And here's what's hard. If we don't understand this in context, we just go, oh, okay, like Jesus sees a guy named Levi. He tells him to follow him. He told some other people to follow him a little bit ago in Mark. Just, okay, great. And Levi comes. That's fantastic. But here's the thing that we don't grab onto in our context that the earliest readers of this would have grabbed onto, and everyone that's around Jesus would have grabbed onto. This is the wrong guy for Jesus to call to be a follower of Jesus, because he's a tax collector. Now, when we hear that, we go, I don't really like tax collectors, but at the same time, we're like, if I just get on TurboTax, they leave me alone, right? I don't really have to worry about it. I pay the little extra insurance to make sure if I get audited, they take care. I don't have to worry about the tax collector people, right? They did have to worry about the tax collector people. And this was a big deal for those, again, that would have read it early on. And if we think about this, one of the things we've seen over the last couple weeks, in case you missed it, Jesus is always surrounded by a crowd at this point. So Jesus isn't, like he's teaching people, he's walking along. Jesus isn't just walking along by himself and he sees a guy named Levi and he goes, Levi, come on. Everybody else around him sees him do this. Some of them probably would have stopped in their tracks. Some of them would have thought, why is he asking him? In fact, some of the other guys, Peter, James, John, that were already called to be disciples may have thought, hang on, time out. Is this actually the guy I want to follow if he's going to call tax collectors? Now, I'm going on about this. You might not understand really what I'm saying, but here's the way I would want us to understand it. A tax collector would be the equivalent of a corrupt IRS agent. Now, if you're really cynical, you'd go, well, they're all corrupt, Pastor Corey. I don't think that's true. I think there's probably some people that are not, right? And I would hope, I don't think it works this way. I don't know enough, but I don't think it works this way. I don't think IRS agents get a cut from if they they take too many taxes from you. Like, I don't think they show up and get, hey, if you take this much, like you can keep this amount, right? I don't think there's an incentive for them to go after more. I don't know. I don't think so, right? But there was an incentive for these guys. See, the way that this worked out is Rome was the empire that was in charge at the time. Most of us kind of know that. But here's what Rome would do. Rome didn't love to get super involved and hands-on in all the places they took over. They would take over and they would be in charge. But they often left whatever governors or mayors, if you want to put it in that context, they would leave them in charge, but they would make sure that they were doing what they're supposed to as far as Rome is concerned. This is why the Jews could continue to worship how they wanted. They could do certain things. They had to ask permission of Rome sometimes, but they could do what they wanted. They could go to the synagogue. There wasn't problems with that. They just had to make sure they were doing what they needed to do in order to accept the fact that Rome was in charge. And so Rome would appoint, or Rome would ask for people that were from the area to do the jobs they needed to do. Rome didn't want to take a bunch of people and insert them into the culture and be like, you do this. They would find people that were already there to do the work for them. And some of these people that would do the work for them were tax collectors. Now, here's a few things, just more interesting things about tax collectors, okay? Here's the way they would have been understood. They would have been understood as traitors to their people and their nation. They would have been the ones that said, I'll collect the taxes. Why would they do that? Well, because what they could do is they could charge whatever they wanted to you, and then they could take the extra as long as Rome got what they needed. So let's just do a simple math equation, right? Let's just say that you owed $10, right? And so Rome was only expecting $10 from you, but if they said, well, you actually owe $20, well, they could charge you that, and you would have to pay it under penalty of law, and they could take the extra $10. Rome would get theirs, they would keep theirs, and they move on forward. These people they could get very wealthy. And so people, obviously, if you were a Jewish person and you saw somebody that was one of your neighbors, one of the people you grew up with, and now they're working for Rome, and now they're taking advantage of you, well, now you've got a problem, right? They're the ones that you don't want to deal with. So they're seen as traitors. They're also grouped in with thieves and murderers. Now, you can see the thieves part, but even as murderers. These guys were the worst of the worst, and this is how they were understood. This is the other thing. They were banned from the synagogue. So if you were a Jewish person and you said, I'm going to be a tax collector, you were also turning your back on your religion. They weren't allowed to go to church anymore. That's how we would say it, right? They're not allowed to go sound. They're not allowed to worship. They were turning their back on their family, on the people around them, and even on the religion they were raised in, because they were choosing to go after the money. And even this is true. Jewish people were allowed to lie to tax collectors. So it's not like in the Ten Commandments, it doesn't say thou shalt not lie, and in parentheses it says except to tax collectors. Like, that's not the way it works. But they would have seen it as, oh, you lied to, that doesn't count, right? It's okay. You don't even have to ask for it. If you're going to lie to the tax collectors, that's fine, because they're terrible people anyway. And so when Jesus is walking by and they see a tax collector booth, by the way, people would have known that. It would have been obvious, tax collector booth. They probably knew who Levi was. And Jesus looks over and says, you come and follow me. Everybody else would have said, what are you talking about? Maybe some of them were like, I don't want to hang out with this guy, right? This is not who I want to be with. And to everyone else in that group, Matthew was a lost cause, right? He had made his choice. He said, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm not interested in being a part of my family maybe anymore, being a part of my people, being a part of my religion. I'm after the money. This is what I'm going to do. And people would have looked at Matthew and said, forget him. He's already made his choice. Nothing to do with him. But this is the interesting thing. To Jesus, Matthew actually had potential. He looked at Matthew and said, this is the person I want to follow. Now, I've realized I've also switched the name, right? This is Levi, but he would be Matthew. And so he's actually the one that wrote the Gospel of Matthew. And what's interesting, don't miss it, Levi immediately responds by saying, I'm going to go. He leaves where he is and says, I will go and I will follow Jesus. Now, first thing, right, we all recognize at times we've screwed up, we've done wrong, and maybe some of us have gotten to the point where we've thought, why would God want something to do with me? Right? Why would God love me? Why would he want to invest in me? Why would he have a plan for my life? And I would say, look at this situation and say, Jesus is always willing to send the invitation. It's always open. It's always there. It's whether or not we want to say yes and we decide to follow him. Now let's keep going to verse 15. It says this, later Levi invited Jesus and his disciples to his home as dinner guests, along with many other tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. And then it says this, there were many people of this kind among Jesus' followers. I think it's an interesting way of saying disreputable sinners. I don't know if there are reputable sinners, but this is the way it's thought out. Like, these are the worst of the worst, right? This is not something where you go, oh, they did something wrong, but it's like, we all do that, like whatever. No. They were tagged as the people that were the worst of the worst. And so, Jesus gets invited to Levi's house. He probably had a really nice house. He probably had a lot of money. And so he invites him over, and they're all eating, and Levi invites all his buddies. All the people that like the other tax collectors, the other people that the rest of the community had looked at and said, they're not good enough anymore, that he would go hang out with, he invites them to come and meet Jesus. And this creates a little bit of a tension, we'll see in the next few minutes. But this is the kind of people, it's interesting, right? It says this is the kind of people that follow Jesus. These are the kind of people that looked around and said, I want to know what Jesus has. And so they would come and they would connect with him. I think it's very interesting that Matthew drops his old life and he immediately celebrates his new life. We have no information that Levi or Matthew, however you want to say it, ever went back to the tax collector's booth. He decided he was done. And I don't know, like, if he had any other previous connection with Jesus. I think he probably knew a little bit of who he was if he was willing to kind of drop it and just go in that moment. But he decided to go, and in doing so, he gives up his old life, but he invites his old friends, and he says, let's celebrate where I'm going to go next. And I want us to kind of catch this for a minute, because the first thing Levi does, okay, is he creates a space where he has the opportunity to connect other people like him to Jesus. Here's what's interesting. He doesn't actually just go and stand up and start preaching and say, hey, everybody, you need to know about Jesus. What he does is he invites them to the table and says, let me introduce you. I think this is something, as we think about the person that we're praying for to know Jesus this year, I think there are times where we might be worried, like, what am I going to say? If somebody asked me how to follow Jesus, would I know what to do? And I think sometimes we need to think it through and just go, I just need to create spaces where I can introduce them to Jesus and they can interact with one another and start to think in that context. But this is what I also see often. This is true not just of Levi, but this is true of people even today, that people who just decided to follow Jesus are always more likely to share Jesus. See, if you're like me, I grew up in church. I don't remember a time when I wasn't in church, and some of you are like that. Some of you don't have that story. Some of you didn't grow up going to church and learn and came to know Jesus at a later point. And one of the things that was always interesting when I was younger, in high school, we would do different, like we'd go on mission trips and we'd do different outreaches and that kind of thing. And we had to write down our testimony. And it was always interesting when the kids that would come along and they had different things in life and they had family issues or, different struggles and things. And like they'd have a testimony and it would be like, and then I saw Jesus and this is how he changed my life and blah, blah. And I'm like, I was 6 and I was in Sunday school and I raised my hand. And it's hard to like equate like what was different about me. Like, did I just stop throwing Play-Doh at other kids? Or like, did I stop mouthing off? I don't know. Like, I don't know that anything like happened. And it's hard at times when you grow up in that context to know, how do I invite people to Jesus? We get used to it, honestly. The longer we know Jesus, the more used to it we get. And in some ways, it's really good. Like, we know and understand who Jesus is, which is fantastic. But we also lose the life change that happens in our hearts and how eager we are to share that with other people. And so we see this even now when I see people that are college age or older especially, like they decide to follow Jesus, their immediate response is, I need to go tell my friends about Jesus. And the longer that goes on, and I'm guilty of this too, we slow down on that. And yet this was Levi's first move, was to say, let me invite my friends that need Jesus to come and meet Jesus. So I want us to kind of sit on that for a second and say, what are we doing? How do we create spaces where it's not just me telling someone about Jesus necessarily, but like, how do I create the spaces where I can introduce them to Jesus in different ways, invite them to the table so that I can help them know who Jesus is and what he's done for us? So in this tension, if we go to verse 16, this is what happens. It says, but when the teachers of religious law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with tax collectors and other sinners, they asked his disciples, why does he eat with such, everybody read this word, scum. It's one of the best words in the Bible. Like, it's one of my favorite verses that, like, you just pull that word out. It's awesome. So here's what I did. I nerded out for a minute. I looked up the Greek word for scum. Okay, so we're all going to learn it today, all right? So if you walk away with one thing, you know how to say scum in Greek. So here it is. Parakatharma. All right? So if you ever want to insult somebody under your breath, just parakatharma, right? Just like, they'll never know. They'll never know what you're saying. Don't insult people. It's not nice. But, right, this is what it means. So when they use this word, they say to Jesus, right? Or they say to his disciples, why is he eating with these people? And they use this word. Here's what they're saying, scum of the earth. We've heard that phrase, but like, let's kind of break it down. Something that's wiped away and thrown out. You're thinking about after you're done cooking or something like that, and you're just like, all the leftovers, you're like, this is gross. Like, just get rid of it, right? That's kind of the idea. Or worthless, disposable, or offensive. Now think about that for a minute. The Pharisees and teachers, the people who are religious leaders at the moment, come and they say, why is your rabbi eating with people that are worthless, disposable, and offensive? And we should think that through and go, we should never think that about anybody. And I think if we think about, are we honest with ourselves in this? We're going to do a little brain exercise and see if we think this, okay? Let's think this through. Because many of us would go, I don't think that about people. Let's pause. I'll give you a couple of scenarios, okay, where you think about this, all right? You get in an elevator, and there's somebody else that gets in the elevator, and you think to yourself, I really hope this elevator doesn't break down because I'm stuck. Who would that person be? That you would not want to be there. Like, we're kind of thinking of them that way, right? Or think about it this way. You're sitting on an airplane, and the seat next to you is open. And you're watching the people come down the aisle, and you're kind of evaluating who you would want to take that seat if they need to, right? We're making a judgment. We're saying, who's worth sitting next to, or who do I not want to be stuck with for a couple of hours? It may not equate the same in our brain, but we're kind of doing it. Like, who's not worth my time? Who's not worth the seat next to me? And I would just ask it this way, right? Who fits this category for you? If we're honest with ourselves, there might be people that we look and we go, we might not use the word parathakarma or say scum or whatever, right? You might not say it. But who are the people that I say, I want nothing to do with? I wouldn't go there. I wouldn't talk to them. I wouldn't want to spend that couple hours on an airplane together. And we have to dig in on that and go, why? What if that person that sits next to us, or that person that we get stuck on an elevator with, like, this is who we're supposed to share Jesus with? And if you do get stuck on an elevator with somebody, I say start preaching to them. Like, they're stuck, tell them about Jesus, right? Just go for it. But who fits that category? Why is that the case? But here's what happens in verse 17. And I broke it into two sections. It's not actually in the text this way, but I did it on purpose just so we can see it. It says, when Jesus heard this, so he overhears the question, he told them, healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do. Now, ruminate on that for a minute, right? We know this. If you're a healthy person, you don't go to the doctor usually. Maybe you should for a checkup or whatever, but like, you don't usually go unless you're sick. He says, well, hey, listen, the people that need me are the people that are sick, and this is who I need to reach out. But then he says this, I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners. Again, think about this. I have come to call not those who think they are righteous. Their perspective of themselves is that they think they're good enough. He says, actually, I'm not here to call you. I'm not. But he says, but those who know they are sinners. Those who know they need the doctor. Those who know they need Jesus. I'll say it this way. I'll kind of explain it. You can think you're healthy, but you know when you're sick. Here's what I mean by that. We all can be in a moment where we think we're totally fine. I should go to the doctor for a regular visit. I don't. I'm terrified of doctors. I don't want to go. Okay, it's just a reality. I know they're going to pull out a needle at some point. I'm like, I'm out. Okay. But at the same time, I know that that should probably happen on a regular basis to make sure everything's fine. Because even though I feel fine, I've also heard the stories of people that think they're fine, and then all of a sudden something happens, something hurts a little bit, or they go to get something else checked out, and then all of a sudden they find something, and there's this long thing they have to go through. There's a diagnosis. There's all the things, right? We can think we're fine. But when we're sick, we usually know. When we feel like we've got the sniffles, even if it's that low, or we've got the pain, or we've got the whatever, like in those moments when there's an indicator, when we go, something's wrong, we know something is wrong, and we go to the doctor, we get it figured out, or however you want to handle it, right? Listen, there's an understanding here where there's times where we think we're fine. We think we don't need Jesus, we think we're good enough, we think whatever, or we at least did at one point. But those of us who know Jesus deeply also understand we know that we need him. We know our own hearts. We know what we do. We know what we've said. We know where we go. We know all the things. And we go, I need him. We recognize we come back to him on a regular basis because we know that we need Jesus. And I want us just to understand this, right? Jesus came to find people who knew they needed him. He says, I didn't come to call the people who think they're fine. Actually, I came to call the people who know there's something wrong and they need me. Now here's what I want to just speak on with this verse at some point. Sometimes this verse can be leveraged to say, see, Jesus didn't judge anybody. Jesus didn't, point fingers. He would go and he would be with people and he would accept them and he wouldn't draw these lines. And I'd be like, let's think about this for a minute. Here's what Jesus is actually saying. He's saying, I'm spending time with people that need me the most, and they're a bunch of sick people. And we should all include ourselves in that, right? But he's not glossing over the fact that they're sinners. He's not denying the fact that there's things they've done wrong. He's not denying the fact that they need to get their lives right and they need him. Actually, he's doubling down on that and going, I'm here to be with the people who need me the most because they're the worst sinners. And if people think they don't need me, he goes, fine, they can think that all they want, but I'm here for the people that need me the most. And guys, if we're honest with ourselves, sometimes we want to put ourselves in a situation where it's like, I don't really need, that person over there needs Jesus more than me. When really, if we're honest with ourselves, we recognize we should be the ones sitting at that table saying we need Jesus more than anything. Because we know and understand our own hearts and minds. Going on to verses 18 to 20. This is where Mark makes a little transition. He jumps kind of to a next section, okay? So it says this, when John's disciples, that's John the Baptist's disciples, so we saw him earlier in Mark, and so he's still got some followers following him. It says, when John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, some people came to Jesus and asked, why don't your disciples fast like John's disciples and the Pharisees do? Jesus replied, do wedding guests fast while celebrating with the groom? Of course not. They can't fast while the groom is with them, but someday the groom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast. So this is interesting. So the Pharisees are coming, and they're kind of saying, why aren't they doing the things they're supposed to do? They're supposed to be fasting. They're supposed to be following the law. Jesus is going to address this a little more in a second. But they're looking around and going, why are the disciples not doing the things that we do? And there was times where they were supposed to fast. They were supposed to pray. They're supposed to do certain things. Jesus' answer is, I'm here right now, there's work to be done, but he also equates it to a celebration. This is when the groom's present, when there's a wedding going on, it would be weird to go to a wedding and say, now's the time when I'm not eating anything, right? Weddings are a great time to eat. You should definitely eat at weddings. And so he says, this is what I want you to understand. This is the celebration that's happening. I would want us to get this. The presence of Jesus should be a celebration. Now, here's what I want us to think through. There's times where fasting and praying needs to be a part of our routine. That's for sure. And we're actually going to do, I think this summer, we're going to talk more about resting and what that looks like, and we're going to talk a little bit about fasting and that kind of thing. But here's the thing. We also want to recognize that when we come and have the opportunity to celebrate Jesus, we should 1,000% do that. And when we come into a space like this, whether it's church on Sunday, or it's a worship night, or it's a retreat like the kids are going on in a couple of weeks and that kind of thing, like there should be a celebratory feel to that. There should be an excitement. There should be good things going on. Now, I recognize there's times when we walk in and church is like the refuge. Like we want to come in, we need help, and we need to be taken care of, and we need to like be ministered to. I totally understand that, but there should be a celebration. And this is a little bit of a soapbox I'll get on for a second, but this is what I would say is true. That the quote, grumpy Christian should be an oxymoron. If we're followers of Jesus, grumpy should be the last thing we are. Because if we know and understand who Jesus is and what he's done for us and the joy we have and what waits ahead of us, grumpy should be off the table. And I'll be honest, there's times, and I don't mean like people here, but like just in general, I've known some really grumpy Christians. They get upset about things. I'm like, why? Like, do you know Jesus? Because we should be excited about some things every once in a while. Like, let the joy of the Lord fill us up. And like these guys are coming to Jesus and they're saying, hey, why aren't you fasting like us, right? Why aren't you following the rules? And Jesus is like, hello, we're here to have a celebration. This is great. I'm here. We should be happy about it. There should be moments in life where we are so excited by who Jesus is that it's a celebration. That it's something that brings joy to our heart and it's reflected in the way we live. And if people know you and you're a Christian and they just think of you as a grump, you should shift gears on that. And you should do some work. This is dangerous. Ask the people closest to you whether they think you're grumpy or not. And give them the ability to answer honestly, okay? And if they say, yes, you're a grump, then you got to figure it out. If they say no, you're in good shape. But talk about it. So going on, okay? Jesus expounds on this a little bit. And he gives us this example. I'll explain it for us so we can understand. In verses 21 to 22, it says this, besides, who would patch old clothing with new cloth? For the new patch would shrink and rip away from the old cloth, leaving an even bigger tear than before. Now, there's two examples here. Let's talk about this one. This one we understand a little bit more, right? It's kind of like if you have a t-shirt that gets printed on before it gets washed and pre-shrunk, it's going to get messed up. If you have an old t-shirt that you put a patch on and you don't pre-shrink that patch, it's going to pull at the t-shirt, right? Because it's going to shrink afterward. It's going to pull it. It's not going to look right. The same idea back then. When the patch would shrink, it would pull, and there would be a worse tear on the thing you're trying to patch. But then he goes in and gives us a different example that we'll have to explain. It says, and no one puts new wine into old wineskins, for the wine would burst the wineskins, and the wine and the skins would both be lost. New wine calls for new wineskins. So here's what Jesus is trying to teach, and I'll explain why he uses this analogy. He's trying to teach them that there's something new. This isn't about fixing something that's old. He's about bringing a new way of life. This is why the Pharisees have such a hard time with Jesus. Because they keep looking at, but we're supposed to do it this way. But we're going back to this. But we need to be fasting. But we need to be following the rules. They keep going back to that. And Jesus keeps saying, listen, there's a new way of doing this. The reason he uses this example is because when they would ferment wine, this is how it would work. They would kill an animal and they would get the skins from that animal, and a fresh animal skin is more flexible than an old one. And so they would put the wine in. It actually wasn't wine yet. They would put it in to ferment. And when wine ferments, it gives off gas and it would expand that wine skin. And so the new wine skins could accept that. They were flexible. They could take that and it would expand, and then you would keep the wine in that skin. Well, the problem would be is if you use that skin one time and you let it dry out, it doesn't have any more flexibility to it. So if then you fill it with new wine and that wine starts to expand it, it's going to break. It's not going to be able to be flexible like it was the first time. And then you've got a problem because your wineskin is broken, so it doesn't work anymore. And the wine spills everywhere, so you lose all of it. The whole thing falls apart. And Jesus is teaching them, we can't just do this, fix one little thing and then call it something new. I would say it this way, right? Jesus came to bring something new, not just fix something that was old. If you have your car and the headlight goes out, you can change the headlight. It doesn't mean you got a new vehicle. Listen, here's what Jesus is trying to teach us. Catch this. There are times when we think through and we understand, we think Jesus saved me and all he did was change this little part of me. That's not what he did. He gave you a whole new life. It isn't just one little thing changes, and then all of a sudden we're just better, and we just move forward. We now decide to live in a different way. Paul would expound on this for us. 2 Corinthians 5:17. We'll just read this one verse. It says this. This means that anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone. A new life has begun. Think back to the very beginning of what we talked about today. When Levi gets called away from that tax collector's booth, what does he do? He immediately changes and goes a different direction. There's a new life for him. And Jesus says this isn't about just adjusting something that was there. I've brought something completely new. And this is just the reality. When you find Jesus, you should find a new way of life. This should change everything. It should change the way you think about your finances. It should change the way you think about your job. It should change the way you think about your marriage. It should change the way you think about your family. It should change the way you think about your church. It should change the way you think about everything. It's a completely new way of life. It's not one little thing that gets fixed and then all of a sudden it's just better. It's about being completely made new. So we go on to the next little episode that Mark gives us. He says this, on the Sabbath day, as Jesus was walking through some grain fields, his disciples began breaking off heads of grain to eat. But the Pharisees said to Jesus, look, why are they breaking the law by harvesting grain on the Sabbath? Okay, so time out. Let's just think about this. I don't know if many of us have done this before, but think about what we're talking about. They're traveling along. There's a grain field. They decide to kind of snap off the little heads of grain, and they kind of are like snacking on it. What do the Pharisees say? Why are they harvesting grain? Okay, now, we live in Lancaster County. Snapping off little heads of grain is not harvesting grain, right? Like we know the difference on when they're harvesting and when they're not. And yet the Pharisees come along. It's the Sabbath day, which adds some things to that, which we'll talk about in a minute. But they come along again, and they're like, hey, why aren't you doing the same thing we're doing? They're kind of going, why aren't we doing the old stuff? And Jesus is helping them understand, there's something new, right? We're not doing it the same way. It's a different thing now. There's a new covenant. But this is why the Pharisees get so upset. The Pharisees actually had a rule for every rule, okay? And I'll give you an example. I call it, this isn't what they called it, but I call it the 1,999 step rule, okay? Here's what this means. On the Sabbath day, you weren't supposed to travel too far, okay? So you're supposed to take a break, you're supposed to chill out, you're supposed to not travel too far. Well, the Pharisees, that wasn't good enough for the Pharisees. They needed an exact number, okay? So this is the number. If you traveled 2,000 steps, you were a dirty, rotten sinner. If you traveled 1,999 steps, you were fine, okay? That's how they had to draw the line. And so when you think about this, like they have rules like this, and then they come to this idea of taking heads of grain off versus harvesting, right? They're looking at this going, you can't touch the grain, right? Don't even move the grain. Just leave the grain where it is, or you're doing something wrong, right? There were these rules that they kind of keep coming back to, and they wanted to hold everybody to these rules. But Jesus responds to them, verses 25 to 26. Jesus said to them, haven't you ever read in the scriptures what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He went into the house of God during the days when Abiathar was the high priest and broke the law by eating the sacred loaves of bread that only the priests are allowed to eat. He also gave some to his companions. Now, what's he talking about here? There's a situation with David when he was on the run. Him and his buddies were on the run, and they were starving. They needed food to eat. And there was bread that was always kept in the temple. It was only for the priests to eat. It wasn't for anyone else. You couldn't just go in and have a snack, okay? But in this circumstance, David and his companions, they're on the run, they're trying to do what's right, but they're starving. They have no food. And so they go in and they take the food they're not supposed to eat, but they eat it. And God has no problem with it. And here's what I want us to get from this understanding. It's not the letter of the law that matters, but the spirit behind the law. And I purposely capitalize spirit because I want us to understand that God is giving these laws. And I think this is what Jesus was trying to help them understand. It's not about just drawing that line and saying, how do we make sure we stay on the right side of the line or the left side of the line? Make sure I'm not in the wrong, make sure I'm not crossing the line. It's about understanding the spirit of what God wants from us. And saying, I'm not so much worried about this. And some of us have trouble with this, right? Some of us really enjoy following the rules. Some of us don't enjoy following the rules to find a place. But we want to understand what's God asking of us. And in most cases, I think this is true. I know this is true with God because his laws are all good. But I think in most cases, most laws are made with some good intent. So let's just think about a simple one, a speed limit, right? You might be on a road where the speed limit's 35, and some days that's totally fine. And then there's a day you're late and you hate that speed limit, right? Like this should be faster, it shouldn't be this slow, like whatever. What was the intent on making that speed limit? It's to make sure everybody's traveling at a good pace, that you're able to react on time, right? There's a thought process that's at least probably in the right compartment. And then there's moments where you're like, this is frustrating. Now, here's where that law changes. If your wife is in the back seat and she's about to give birth and you're doing 65 in the 35 and that cop pulls you over and you go, she's going to have a baby, he's probably going to not give you a ticket, put on the lights, and drive you to the hospital, right? Now the spirit of the law is different. It's supposed to be that way when things are normal. This is what we're supposed to do. But there's moments where we have to say, what's the point of this? And there's moments where the rules can't hold us hostage to what needs to be done that's safe and what's good and what's right. And Jesus says, stop being so worried about the letter of the law. Don't be so focused on that. Think about what God is giving you and how you can understand this. And then Jesus goes on to talk about the Sabbath here in the last two verses we'll look at, 27 and 28. Then Jesus said to them, the Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people and not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. Pause. Read that again. The Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people. Listen, the reason God gives us rules is to meet our needs. It's because it's the way that we're supposed to operate. It's not this. This is what Jesus says. He's expounding on what we just talked about. And not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. He's saying God doesn't make rules just so he can give us a checklist of things we have to do. He gives us rules and requires things of us because it's what's healthiest for us, it's what's best for us, and that's what we should follow. And so when we recognize that, it changes the way we understand it. And in a Sabbath sense, this is what Jesus then goes on to say. He says, so the Son of Man is Lord even over the Sabbath. He goes on, this is another claim where Jesus says, I am God. I'm the Lord over this. This is the way I want us to understand this, that the Sabbath is a gift to enjoy, not just a rule to follow. I think we should think about rules and regulations God gives us more and more in this tense. It can be very difficult at times to look at the rules that we find in Scripture and say, why does God do that? Why does he say that? Why does that he require this of me? This is frustrating. Wouldn't God want me to be happy in this way? Or wouldn't God want me to do that? In some sense, we look at it and we go, it's a gift. It's a gift that God says, this is how you are to live. This is the best way for you. And it's not just a rule to follow. It's not something God just put in place so that we had things we needed to do. I want to end sort of this conversation on the idea of rest and kind of the idea of Sabbath for a minute. And I want us to think it through this way. Rest is not the reward we get for working hard. It's the reset we need to work well. I think oftentimes, I've thought this, right? You work hard for a while, you do your job, and then what? You get to the weekend, right? You earned the weekend, or you get there. Or you worked really hard for a few months, and then you go on vacation. And it's almost like, I've earned this, and that's why it's good. It's actually the wrong way to think about it. It's actually that it's what we need in order to work hard. It's not the reward for working hard. We actually need that reset to happen. And we see this other places in the world, and we kind of interact with it on a regular basis. Earlier this week, these are my AirPods. Earlier this week, they wouldn't charge. I put them on my charger overnight. I have a charger where I put my phone and my watch and my AirPods all down at the same time, and they charge there every night. And 2 days in a row, they didn't charge. And I'm like, what is happening with these, right? So then I'm starting to think, like, what do I need to do, blah, blah, blah. So I start to look around, and I start to look at what I can do to fix them, right? Well, dummy me, reset them, right? So then I look that up, I reset, guess what? They charge perfectly fine. We know that that's true sometimes with technology, but we don't do it for ourselves. And there's moments where we need to get the rest in order to turn yourself off and turn yourself back on again. That's what sleep is, right? We reset ourselves every night. We should. Go on a vacation, step away from work for a while, turn off that part of your brain, and then turn it back on again. That's what we're supposed to do. And God actually says, Jesus actually says, this is what we're supposed to do. And I get it. There's those of us, we actually really enjoy our work and we love it. And we actually want to go hard and we want to do it on a regular basis. I totally understand that. but it's better for us when we take a break. In fact, Jesus says, this is what's good for you. This is what we're supposed to do. And so it's interesting to me that Jesus, in this conversation with the Pharisees, he doesn't say, you're wrong about the Sabbath. He doesn't say that we're not supposed to take a break. He just says, understand the spirit of the rule behind it, what's necessary. Stop splitting hairs on guys just taking the heads off of wheat for a snack and harvesting. Get behind the spirit of the law and say, what does God want for me? What is best for me? What has he called me to? And live in that space instead of trying to delineate all these things. All right, 3 questions before we wrap up to kind of think through. I know we bounced around, again, different episodes in Mark today, right? Here's the 3 questions. Number 1, what's your friend group like? What's your friend group like? We talked about this last week a little bit with the paralyzed guy that gets lowered down through the ceiling. He had friends that surrounded him that had great faith, and they would take him to Jesus no matter what. Here's the opposite side of that we see with Matthew. He's got friends who need to know Jesus, and he invites them to Jesus. We've got to have both. And I understand this is a unique thing I've realized. When we lived in Pottstown and we were helping to plant a church there, if I met someone for the first time, 99% chance they've never been to church in their life or they don't go to church regularly. And so I would get the chance like, hey, what's your faith like? They're like, I don't have one. Or sometimes they'd be like, I don't like God, or I grew up and I quit going, or whatever. Totally different in Lancaster County. 45 minutes away. Meet someone new. Hey, what's your faith like? Oh, I go to this church. I've gone there for 100 years. It's honestly kind of frustrating as someone who wants to invite people to know Jesus, because I'm like, where's the people who think they need Jesus, right? I'm like trying to work on it. No, it's great. It's great that we all know Jesus. I'm happy about that, really. But when we're trying to meet people and tell them about Jesus, but here's what some of that is too. It's a little bit of a cultural Christianity where it's like, oh, I go to this church, but really their parents went to that church for a long time. They don't go anymore, or whatever. But my point is this. We have to do work sometimes in this context to find people that don't know Jesus. It's easy to surround ourselves with people who know him all the time. I get that, especially as a pastor. Like, I'm supposed to hang out with people who know Jesus. It's great, but it takes work. It means we actually have to find some avenues. You might have to actually pick up a new hobby or go to a thing or show up at the meeting or join a club or join the committee or do whatever. And you're like, I don't want to do any of that. I'm like, yeah, but it's a mission field. This is what Levi did. His first thing. Let me tell the people that don't know Jesus about Jesus. We need the people who are going to point us to Jesus. 1,000%. We need those people I called mat carriers last week who are going to carry us to Jesus when we need to. But we also need the people that we've built relationship with that don't know him so that we can help them know who he is. And listen to me, if we don't know anybody who doesn't know Jesus, we should do some work in that area. There should be active participation to say, I've got relationships with people who don't know Jesus at all. And I want them to know who Jesus is. I want to invite them to the table. Think about that. Think about who those people are. Second question, what is your life like because of Jesus? When Levi met Jesus, his life changed completely. Are there things in your life that you could say, if I didn't know Jesus, I would be different? Or have we kind of lived this out and went, well, when I was 6, I'll talk about me. When I was 6, I raised my hand in Sunday school, and they told me I wasn't going to hell anymore, so I just go on living because I'm cool with not going to hell now. That's not the way it should play out. It should be much deeper than that, and it has grown much deeper for me than that. But are there differences? Is there a way I'm living where my life is new? It's not just something little in me changed. It's that my whole way of life, I have a new way of life that I've now signed up for, and this is the direction I'm going. And then I would ask this question. Maybe this is the hardest one. What's your Sabbath like? Maybe if we're honest, we would go, I don't really know what a Sabbath is. Again, this is another way you can invite people around you that know you really well. Ask them how well you rest. And give them permission to answer. And here's what I'm not saying. If you're married to someone who doesn't rest well, you're not allowed to like elbow and be like, remember what Pastor Corey said, right? Don't do that. But at the same time, do we rest well? Are we able to take the time off? Are we able to reset and say, this is what I need in order to work well, not just that it's a reward for working hard? So I don't know what area hits you the most today. I don't know what thing is the thing that you need to work on. Maybe it's one of these. three things. Maybe it's something else we talked about. Maybe it's somewhere else in the story. But listen, Jesus, when he shows up in the space, he makes things new. He doesn't just fix something small. He creates new life wherever he shows up. And our lives should be completely different because we know and follow Jesus. And not only that, but the people around us should be able to see that clearly. Levi wasn't ashamed to invite his friends over and say, let me introduce you to Jesus. I think sometimes there's tension in that for us. We're almost worried about whether they're going to say no, whether they're going to reject it, I get it. I do. But there should be that new life in us that's evident to the people around us. That we act differently, we live differently, and we invite people to live a different way alongside us.